I'm ready whenever you are.
Oh, I am. So we are going to start with the introduction by Richard Berger. Good morning, Timothy. I really wonder what is going on.
I can't help it. This intro created by Mr.
Richard.
Berger is
Yes,
Richard Berger is just so it's just gets my juices going.
it does, doesn't it? Yes, it's well upbeat. It's uplifting. It's really great. It sets the mood for the room.
Maya, I have to apologize for the background. I'm not on at my usual studio. The
Mm-hmm.
wind and the weather did not um, really complement going out sailing this weekend. So this is a weekend where I'm running errands and staying at home. So I'm giving you my briefing from the home studio.
Well, that you have a very nice background, so you don't have to apologize for anything. Thank you once again for preparing for the briefing. And of
Thank you.
course, I cannot wait to hear what is happening right now, what happened during the last week. There have been quite a few questions, some new developments, and well, we'll see how all plays out. But before that, of course, we need to hear you.
Okay.
And yes, so to everybody who is on Clubhouse today again, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We are here with Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Esquire, and he's going to walk us through the latest happenings in Japanese politics. Stay with us, and if you have questions, of course, we can talk about them after Timothy finishes the live streaming session. He's going to move to Clubhouse, so stay with us and let's start. Timothy.
Thank you very much, Maya. You might remember 2 sessions ago on Sunday, I was broadcasting from the port of Misaki, and we were wrapping up at around 10 o'clock in the morning, and there was one final question that came up. And unfortunately, I was in a berth that I needed to get out of. In fact, they were throwing me off the pier, and so I got cut off unexpectedly. I should have known it because they told me at 10 o'clock another boat was coming in. So I apologize for that, and I apologize for the individual who loaded a question up. I didn't even get to address it. I think you took care of it because I went offline after that, Maya.
Yes, yes, I tried
You
to do.
remember that? Yes.
I remember that, and hopefully we'll be better prepared to
Yep.
deal with such questions from now on. So yes,
Oh,
thank you for
okay.
that.
So just to prepare the audience, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we give this briefing about 30 minutes on what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you, that's relevant, that's kind of timely. And we do this simulcast on LinkedIn and on Clubhouse. And then we wrap that up and then we continue exclusively on Clubhouse. And Maya uploads these briefings probably on Monday or Tuesday or so to LinkedIn, and also they're viewable on Clubhouse thereafter. So let's just get right into the briefing. There's a lot going on. You know, it seems like every week there's just more and more that's happening. Last week, while we were giving this briefing, North Korea shot off 8 ballistic missiles. They all landed in the Sea of Japan. And there was a lot going on, not only in that area, but also diplomatically too. The prime minister is on a real tear, flying all over the world and really appealing to an international market. I think his handlers and the prime minister's office has recognized the great push, the great appeal this has to Japanese voters. And it turns out that he's doing really well in this area. He was foreign minister for 10 years, you might remember. And Mr. Hayashi, his number two in his political faction, is really doing an excellent job. He's very affable. If you know him or have seen him on TV, he's a great representative of Japan and Japan's interests. And so I think this double team is really doing well. There are a lot of people that are criticizing the prime minister within his party, in fact, saying that he needs to spend a little bit more time on the domestic issues. And this actually will become a little bit more of an issue as we get into the elections. So the current diet session ends on the 12th, I believe, of today is, what is today? Today is, I wrote it down and I'm kind of forgetting where I am. What is today, Maya?
Are you talking about the date? It's June the 12th.
Today's the 12th. So the diet session will end this next week. And the elections begin on the 20th. So we're 8 days away from the election campaigning beginning. So the diet session finishes this next week. And so all of the diet members, they have a bit of a break, and then the official campaigning just starts up. So I'm trying to explain just what the time frame is here for the election. So there's still a lot more that we can expect happening that's going to be going on diplomatically, also kind of militarily, what's going on with the military push with North Korea. We can anticipate the United States has in fact suggested very strongly that a underground nuclear test can be anticipated by North Korea in the coming days. They shot 8 rockets, probably as a consequence of this show, this last week. And the United States and Korea in joint exercises fired off 8 ballistic missiles themselves as a consequence of that. So it's a kind of a tit for tat situation. What's going on in the Korean Peninsula is it's very dynamic. You know, we've had Quad, and then the new president of South Korea, Mr. Yoon, was elected maybe 2 weeks ago, just before the Quad started. And the relationship between Japan and Korea is so central to the United States' overall presence in Asia and the Quad, and also the defense buildup, which is necessitated by, the aggression of China in the region. So there are steps being made. There is progress being made. You can see it pretty dramatically in the former South Korean administration. The relationships between Japan and South Korea were very cool. There was a statute that was making the rounds in several European capitals, kind of highlighting the comfort woman issue, which really irked the Japanese. A lot of issues going on there. North Korea kind of swept aside this suggestion that Japan wanted to resolve once and for all this abduction issue. As you know, many Japanese citizens, it's actually not a huge number, but even a small number is alarming. Japanese citizens were knocked on the head and bundled into bags and thrown into North Korean submarines and trundled off to North Korea to teach and acculturate and train North Korean spies. It's a program that's been going on for 20 years. And there has been some progress made there, but the families of these kidnapped people still hold a very powerful sway within the prime minister's office. So this latest kind of slapping aside of the issue as unimportant by the North is distinctly unhelpful. But then you've got the ballistic missiles as well, and the tit for tat with the United States and South Korea. You can see and you can anticipate this building alliance between South Korea, America, and Japan, and this push by the prime minister. Actually, the push is more supported by former Prime Minister Abe, who is well known as a hawk. Mr. Kishida is more of a dove. Him and Mr. Hayashi have long been known as somewhat doves, and also more friendly towards China. and the pace of change there, not only in the military side, but also diplomatically, is beginning to form some sort of a gel. The distribution of forces between, us against them is becoming much clearer. You can see that in several areas. The one I'm referencing right now is this push by Mr. Abe to push this defense spending from 1% of GDP to 2%. We talk about this frequently, but the impact of that and the reliability of that goal is becoming more clear. In the Diet just this last week, the LDP proposed and the cabinet accepted this new defense spending, this defense posture, without mentioning actually the 2%. That was pushed by the LDP. It was pulled back a little bit because it seemed to be a little bit upsetting, particularly in light of the elections that are looming. So they didn't actually mention the 2%, but the public discourse, people know that is the target within the next 5 years. So you match that up with what's going on in South Korea, and also these joint drills between the United States and South Korea. Things are really starting to reach something of a fever pitch, and Mr. Kishida is the beneficiary of a lot of circumstances that his predecessor did not enjoy. It's interesting to point out that although at this point in his administration, similarly, Mr. Suga had achieved many advances, many successes. Mr. Kishida hasn't been prime minister for a year yet, but still at this time, Mr. Suga was really on a roll and being very successful. He never really got much credit for that. Although now, Mr. Kishida is not as confronted as Mr. Suga was with different challenges that he had, but he is receiving lots of benefit. He's getting lots of accolades. His popularity, the popularity of him personally and for his cabinet, is about 61.5%. That was the same number that I gave you last week, because there hasn't been a recent poll that's increased that number. But it is remarkable for any prime minister at this point in his administration to have such a high approval rating, and in fact, higher than when he started. Usually there's a bit of a bump, a honeymoon period, and then they begin to suffer and get attacked by the opposition party. That hasn't happened with this prime minister. And so the prognosis for Mr. Kishida is he's going to be in the position for a long time. He's going to succeed himself, and he's going to have a strong, firm hold on the economy and on nation building, which was unavailable to many of his predecessors. So this election that's coming up on July 10th, it's established now. The election campaigning will begin on the 22nd of this month, and it will go until the 9th, which is a Saturday, and then elections will be on Sunday. We can talk a little bit about the dynamics of those elections, the parties that are vying for the seats. It is, once again, it's not the full House. It's one half of the House of the upper house. The lower house is still in session, and they're kind of supporting. The lower house is far bigger, maybe 3 times bigger than the lower house in terms of numbers. So about 112 or 13 seats will go up for election in this next candidate, in this next round. So a lot of the members, actually all of the members of the lower house, will be supporting their candidates. They're required to by their political factions, by their parties. The fight is to increase your number of seats, whether it's a political party or even within the LDP, within the faction, so that it enhances your stability, it enhances your throw weight. Definitely after the election, there will be a cabinet reshuffle. You can kind of guess some of the people who will be moved around, even at this point in the game. You might have noticed there is the Shangri-La conference going on in Singapore now. Mr. Kishida is actually joining that. It's the first time for the Japanese Prime Minister to join this conclave. It's a defense-related conclave in about 10, 12 years. And he made the keynote speech, in fact. So his profile there as a kind of a spokesman, as a statesman, he's got so many opportunities, and this also enhances his standing, not only in the country, but also externally too. So you will have noticed that he made the keynote speech. He was joined there by his defense minister, which is Mr. Abe's brother, Mr. Kishi, Lloyd Austin, who is the Secretary of Defense in the United States, and then the Defense Secretary in China. They all made their own presentations. So kind of everybody and their brother who is important in this region was there and had a prominent role. It's unfortunate that on the Japanese side, Mr. Kishi was with a cane, and he looks somewhat frail. He has been ill for some time. So you can anticipate that the Minister of Defense will be changed in a cabinet reshuffle, but there'll be other people too. And a lot of that will depend on who did well in the election. You might, I don't know if you follow this as closely as I do, but there was a no confidence vote that was put to the House this last week. It was a no confidence vote sponsored by the Constitutional Democratic Party and the Social Democratic Party. And it initially came as an attack against the Speaker of the House, Mr. Hosoda. Mr. Hosoda was the faction head of the Seiwakai, the Abe faction, currently the Abe faction. When Mr. Kishida became prime minister, Mr. Hosoda gave up that seat and became Speaker of the House, and Mr. Abe swung in to take over the leadership of the largest faction within the LDP, 98 members in that political faction. So the Mr. Hosoda, as the Speaker of the House, in relation to Mr. Abe and that large faction, he's an open target for attack. And just before the election, of course, everybody's looking for anything that they can do to besmirch the front leader and to pull those votes down and to enhance their own votes. So it's unclear who has kind of agitated that, but the no confidence motion was provided by the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is a little bit, in some areas, the Constitutional Democratic Party will vote with the LDP on the supplementary budget or on different rules or House motions that are ongoing, but it is in the opposition party. So to promote this no confidence motion against the Speaker of the House is very aggressive. It didn't pass, by the way, and the reason why it was filed against Mr. Hosoda, Bunshun, I have a Bunshun, this week's Bunshun, I don't have it right here. Bunshun, which is the weekly magazine, it's not a scandal rag, but it's frequently referred to as a scandal rag. It produces and reports on a lot of the news that the stiff collar newspapers and NHK, of course, will not report on. The accuracy is somewhat tainted, but it does produce the news that, especially the salacious news that people just love to eat up. In any event, for 4 weeks in a row, Bunshun, and this is very unusual, usually when they attack somebody for inadequacies, for not doing what they should be doing, for CEOs or for corporations that get into trouble, it's usually a one-hit piece. It might be 2-hit pieces. There's been an a running commentary on some of the people, for example, the husband of the princess who had to give up her royalty to get married to him and live in the United States for his trying to pass the law exam. That's been an ongoing one. But for the Speaker of the House to have an attack 4 weeks in a row is really sensational. So this has been building up. He was called to the mat, and a no confidence vote was put against him. It failed. The strange thing that happened in conjunction with that was that there was also a no confidence vote supported by the same two parties and some of the opposition parties, less vehemently, but certainly denied by the LDP, against Mr. Kishida for, number one, passing a supplementary budget, which they passed 2 weeks ago, an enormous supplementary budget that it is criticized, and it is complained of, that it didn't really address the needs of normal people, the people who are suffering the most. It did deal with subsidies for gas. It did enhance the reserve fund. It made amends for people who have children who are, in the lower income bracket. But it didn't do much else than that. And that really irked the Constitutional Democratic Party, and they wanted to censure the prime minister. Neither of these motions, since the LDP holds such a large majority in the House, would pass. But just as getting that news across, and people would be reporting on it and talking about it, how salacious is the Mr. Hosoda? Is he actually cavorting with these young newspaper reporters? Are these stories of him being a lecherous old man really true? And sometimes it's just creating a story to pull people down and to create some sort of discord. Neither of them survived, as you would expect, but it does begin to create this division here. Whereas once, even with the opposition parties, there was, in the last election, when Mr. Kishida actually ran for in the lower house elections this last year, there was a bit of co-joining forces of the opposition parties to run candidates, to forego running my candidate in that district if you let me run my candidate unopposed by your opposition candidate in my district. There was a lot of horse trading going on there. But now it's become a little bit more fractious, and as a consequence, the LDP becomes that much stronger in the upper house elections that we're just approaching. So getting back to the strength of Mr. Kishida and the possibility that the LDP is going to be doing extremely well, just take a look at the diplomatic footprint that the prime minister has right now. He's in Shangri-La now. The United Nations has approved Japan's 12th bid for a non-permanent Security Council seat. Japan joined the UN in 1958, I believe, in 1956. And for the last 24 years, it has been a non-permanent member of the Security Council. It wants to become a permanent member. There are 5 permanent members. They're all nuclear powers. They all have a veto power. And Mr. Kishida's role in coming up into the Security Council, and his prominence globally, it's part of a larger plan, I believe, in having him as a kind of a power broker as the divisions become wider and wider. You'll remember that he's promoted almost without cajoling, without public cajoling, but I think there's a lot of that going on, to boost from 1% to 2% the defense spending. That number is so curious because that's the requirement for all NATO countries. Japan isn't a NATO country, couldn't be considered a NATO country. We're on the other side of the world. But it does seem that there's a drive for Japan to play a larger, more dominant role, not only diplomatically, but also militarily. And that's the reason for the rise in the defense spending. Also, Japan will host the G7 meeting, which will be in Hiroshima around this time next year. The date is not specifically set, but this is a big deal not only for Japan but also for Mr. Kishida. That means he comes from Hiroshima, as you know, and to host the G7 there is an opportunity to showcase Japan's non-proliferation stance and its ability, not only its peace constitution, which seems to be a bit kind of at the end of its longevity. I think probably within the next 2 or 3 years there will be a change to revise the constitution. But to have that kind of international conference in his hometown, and to promote non-nuclear proliferation or nuclear war, and also I think his push with a lot of support, I would believe, to be on the Security Council in a more visible role. It takes 2/3 of the vote of all of the 98 members of the UN membership to vote for non-permanent members. Japan scored so high, 184 of the members voted for it. So you can see that a lot of the ODA, the overseas development money, the contributions Japan has, pretty much as a tradition in helping developing countries and also countries in the region with infrastructure projects, that develops this goodwill. It's all part of a plan to elevate the Japanese presence there. And when you look at it in this region of the world, this is a real tender area of the world. If there's going to be a conflict, a global conflict, it is most likely to occur either in the Middle East with Iran, Israel, perhaps Syria, or in Japan, or not Japan, but in this region involving Taiwan, North Korea, and China. So this push to bolster Japan and to make it really a dominant player, kind of worrying for some people because of all of the unaddressed, lingering sentiments from World War II. This issue with the comfort women of North Korea, that kind of highlights that. Also, this tension between South Korea and Japan, still 70 years after the war. Well, it went on much longer with Korea, in fact. But many people would say it's been unaddressed because of inaction or lack of action or lack of appropriate action. But these things need to be addressed, and I think they're receiving concerted effort. In any event, the Prime Minister seems to be doing extremely well and is expected to do well in this next election. So keep your hats on. Let me see what else we have. The LDP platform for candidates in the upper house election was released and approved by the LDP this week. It concerns a lot of issues with regard to the budget, with the economy, also with defense spending and Japan's stance in the global community. So those have been published and distributed. And so you can expect that people will be singing the same song and be not attacked, but just the distinction between what the opposition party wants and what the LDP is stating. It kind of already puts up the straw man there, and now the opposition parties can attack that. I think with Komeito, their coalition partner, there is a unified theme there. Komeito has also agreed to support the LDP in some of the single seat districts, and the LDP has also agreed to support the Komeito. That means not run an LDP candidate in certain districts that the Komeito feels is very important. So at the end of the day, probably Komeito and the LDP will at least maintain parity as what they have now. And whether they win or lose is not whether they decrease what they have right now. That would be pretty much a disaster. They would be criticized for that. But it's how big that win is. So they're both expected to do well. And Komeito, as a result, will also have a cabinet seat, as you would expect. Moving on, I'd like to talk about North Korea and what's going on there. As I mentioned, 8 ballistic missiles were fired last week, kind of during this show. Throughout the day on Sunday, they were fired. Very provocative, all at once. This hasn't happened since maybe I'm sorry, 2017, when there were 4 rockets fired in quick succession, with the statement made by North Korea that this is against the U.S. imperialist U.S. Aggression forces in Japan. This is our demonstration against them. That's what they said. The missiles weren't directed at Okinawa, but they were fired in a way that if the trajectory was changed, they could have easily hit U.S. bases in Japan. So since then, that's 2017 until now, and this time it's 8 in one day. That is very unusual. It triggered the UN Security Council to have a meeting to chastise and to bring criticism and perhaps sanctions against North Korea for that. The problem is with the UN Security Council, there are 5, like I said, there are 5 permanent members, all nuclear powers, the United States, Britain, France, Russia, China, who have a veto vote. And on these issues, both Russia and China had a veto vote to sanction North Korea. The same thing happened with a more recent vote to sanction Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. That also received a veto vote. So this issue with the UN having no teeth to actually do anything in a time that something needs to be done is interesting when the Japanese Prime Minister is beginning to raise his profile there. His claim, and he's reported this in Diet proceedings and in his appeal to joining the UN non-permanent status, is that he is seeking to reform the UN, and he's getting a lot of support there from many of the countries that are on this side of the divide, if I can say that, of the 184 country members that are there. So you can expect either something happening in reform of the UN within the next, I think very, very shortly, within the next 2 years, or the formation of something different than what we have right now. And I think, in fact, it's kind of shown its usefulness. It's shown its weakness over the last 60 years that it's been in existence. So I think that the future portends lots of change, lots of dynamic change, lots of real change that is really in the works now. And you can see this in a lot of different areas of the economy and just geopolitics too. But talking about the economy, the Japanese economy continues to suffer. Mr. Kuroda, who is the president of the Bank of Japan, appointed by the prime minister, continues to maintain his stance on keeping easy monetary policy. This is in drastic conflict with what's going on in the EU and also the United States. So the United States really sets a model for Japan on many issues, and the yen fluctuation certainly is in close cooperation with what's going on with the Federal Reserve. But the Bank of Japan has decided it's going to maintain its policy of having a loose monetary policy, even in light of the fact of rising inflation and commodity prices really, really rising. This is alarming. It has people on caution, not red alert, but on caution as they watch the yen further suffer. This week it touched 134, 133, high 133 to the dollar. It's been going that way for the last 5 weeks in particular. And so with rising commodity prices because of, not only because of Ukraine, but just because of supply chain breakage and also COVID. So a lot of people couldn't work. They were, there are still lots of ships in harbors trying to be unloaded. So you can anticipate that the commodity prices are going to continue to increase. And the prices here in Japan, because Japan is an economy that really depends on imported commodities. Japan doesn't produce so many commodities. It imports them and then it exports finished products, cars being primarily among them. So the economy here is beginning to take a bit more of a hit, and I think the trajectory you're going to see increasing. The yen at 134 yen to the dollar, the president of the Bank of Japan mentioned in the diet that just this last week, it seems to be tolerable to the consumers, the Japanese consumers. He said that and was criticized roundly. The next day, he actually came out and offered an apology for his selection of words. But I think that indicates his stance on how normal people should be able to anticipate what's going to happen. So the prices of fuel and goods and foodstuffs is going to continue to increase, and it's going to be hard for the consumers to tackle that. In response to that, you've heard about the Prime Minister talking about his new capitalism, and this is always getting a little bit more beef on those bones, and it is one of the pillars of the LDP election campaign that all of the LDP candidates for the upper house will be singing, this new capitalism to increase wealth of the normal Japanese person, to shift from savings into investment, and to also focus more on a lot of the different industries like biopharma, on digital, on AI, and on quantum computing. So they've identified a couple of industries that the Japanese government is going to focus on, and they're really putting a lot of money into that. So you can anticipate in very short order, I think probably within the next 2 years, which is lightning fast in Japanese terms. I know it seems a long, far away goal, but these things are in process and they will be on the books. We always complain, foreign observers always complain that in Japan, things take too long and it's just slow. For example, this action by the Bank of Japan on the yen, rate, a little bit too late, a little bit too laggardly. But in fact, when the Japanese actually decide to do something, it comes in very quickly, as we've seen with the COVID response. So there's a lot of movement going on there, and I think you can anticipate a lot of things happening after the election. So I think there are a lot of things in the Japanese economy with regard to not only the yen dollar value, but also with rising prices. It's being seen every day now. Newspapers are reporting, what was it? Uniqlo just announced that their prices will be going up by about 1,000 yen per item. You're seeing this all the time. And 7-Eleven said they're going to be charging, 10 yen more for their cups of coffee. Once people start this bandwagon, they've been so reluctant and actually resistant to increasing prices. In fact, when commodity prices begin to fluctuate or the yen dollar vacillates, usually instead of changing their prices, they just take a hit to their revenue stream. And they've been doing this for dozens of years. And now this is an opportunity that is justified by a lot of different factors. So the manufacturers here in Japan are really jumping on the bandwagon and raising prices very aggressively to accommodate what might happen in the future, but also to catch up with what happened in the past. So you're actually seeing this across the board. The unfortunate thing is you're not going to know much about this until after the election, and then after the election, things will change. The Japan Meteorological Agency has also reported that this summer will be a really hot summer, hotter than usual. Tsuyu, the rainy season, is already supposed to start on June 12th. That's when it starts in Tokyo, although it's a beautiful day today. Couldn't go sailing because of the weather. But the rainy season this year is predicted to be harder than usual, more rainfall than usual, and to last just a tiny bit longer. So it'll probably go until right around the end of the election period on July 10th. Also, just as an interesting sidebar, Japanese election participation is highly influenced by the weather. So if on the 10th, the Sunday, it is a rainy day, fewer people tend to go to the polls. And when that happens, traditionally the LDP does well, whereas when people go to the polls, usually the opposition parties do a little bit better. So watch the weather for the 10th, because that will be something of a barometer of what you can anticipate in terms of how many people actually went out. You might have heard that the Prime Minister has also announced GoTo Travel is going to come back strong. They're considering reinitiating GoTo Travel. In fact, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government has already initiated GoTo Travel. You might not have heard too much about it, but they've initiated that for GoTo Travel within the metropolitan area. So if you are a resident of Tokyo and you're going to day travel somewhere in Tokyo for vacation or for a day trip or something like that, you will get a boost. And what the GoTo Travel, just for those who don't know, typically nationwide, it is a limit of 20,000 yen per person per day. But you can only receive that if it's half of what you've actually spent. So if you spend 40,000, then you would get the full benefit. But if you spend more than 40,000, the maximum benefit you will get is 20,000 per day per person. And this is to encourage people to go out and spend money and to kind of proliferate the economy by going out and spending money. They are elated. The Japanese people are typically, you can say, are elated with the restrictions of COVID falling and the opening of the doors for tourism. Tourism is just a barometer of the wider economy, but it is relatively, not quite, but it's relatively free money for the economy. People come in, they don't really burden too much the social services or the infrastructure of the country too much. Toilet facilities, transportation facilities, hotel facilities are somewhat burdened, but the overall structure of the economy is not overly burdened. These individuals come in with money and then they leave with goods and memories and lots of photographs. And so it's a great thing. It hasn't been on for almost 2.5 years. So GoTo Travel was initiated under the Suga administration, you might remember, to kind of engender a little bit more willingness of the Japanese to travel, because they were somewhat downtrodden due to COVID. It only lasted 4 months. He had to pull it off the table, and it's had a couple of blips since then, but now I think the gloves are off. And from probably the end of this month, or certainly by July 1st, GoTo will continue. They're thinking of changing the name. It's not going to be GoTo because of the COVID situation, because of the Suga kind of back and forth on that. They might change the name of it, and they might change the dynamic a little bit. Initially, it was for nationwide travel by all Japanese citizens. And what they're going to do now is they're going to have each individual prefecture manage that, with the state government providing the funds for recompensation of those funds. But it's also within the prefecture, they'll be their go-to, and that'll be step number one. And then for the citizens of their prefecture to be traveling throughout Japan, there will be step two. And once again, day travel is included in that, as well as overnight travel. The distribution of how much you get for the day travel is reduced compared to the overnight travel, but it seems to be a very successful kind of kick to the economy. So you can expect a lot of action there, as well as, the foreigners are not, or the foreign visitors, the tourists are not eligible to the GoTo Travel, but they do supplement, that vibrancy. They get more people into areas of common interest, hotspots, Kyoto and some of the castle cities, and just different places throughout Japan. Japan is listed as the #1 tourist destination in the world. They've done a survey on that was produced even after having its borders closed. It almost seems like you've heard of revenge travel and revenge shopping because people have been cooped up for so long. It does seem like having Japan closed up for that period of time did enhance the appeal of Japan, because it was a cool place to visit before then. Japanese pop culture, Japanese food was a hot item, and the main tourist attractions were always packed. So this pent-up demand, I think you're going to see a tremendous resurgence there. Japanese airports are preparing for that. They're a little bit worried that the screening process is not up to the 20,000 people per day who are admitted. These aren't 20,000 that are going to be flooding into Narita exclusively, but through the various airports that do accept international travels. The limit is 20,000 for tourists and business travelers. So this is starting, this last Friday it started. There are tour groups that are responsible for handling these tourists that are coming in. So if you want to come in, there are 98 countries that qualify for non-screening of COVID when they come into Japan. There are a couple of requirements before they come in. They have to have tested 72 hours beforehand, had a negative result. They can come in a group, and then the group is pretty tightly monitored by the tour group that is exclusively responsible for them. So when they come in, they actually need to stay with the group. They have to follow the person with the flag walking around. Nobody can bolt off and have their own individual travel, go visit their family or something like that. They will be closely monitored. And in fact, the tour agencies that handle them must also kind of follow them around and record where they're sitting on the train, where they're sitting in the restaurant or the diner, to kind of record the people that are sitting around them, so that if in any case one of them comes up with COVID, there can be a quick response, and the people who are potentially impacted by that would be notified. A lot of the tourism agencies are sick of that. They don't want to do that. It's too much work. So they're withdrawing from participating until the doors open wider. But there's enough demand. So apparently there are plenty of tourists coming in. You're going to see this more and more. There'll be steps coming in as they monitor the number of people who are coming in and compare that to the number of people who came in who actually tested positive. So they've been doing that very stringently for the last 2 months since they've allowed the permanent residents and families of permanent residents and Japanese nationals to come back in. The numbers are actually very low for those people who have tested and come in and actually do have COVID. It comes out. So it's less than 1% today. So that's why they feel confident in allowing the tourists to come through. Don't want to go on too long about that, but it's a great sign of the times, and it's a great indication that we're coming back. The economy is potentially going to come back from these last 2 years. The other thing is that the Japanese government, this should have been done far earlier, but they've done a different analysis on children that have been, as a result of COVID, been at home and been schooled at home or through the teleconferencing, that sort of thing. They did a really interesting study about children whose routines were broken, and instead of having breakfast at 7:45 or even 8 o'clock and then going to their school, walking to the school in most instances, and under COVID they can stay in. Mom is at home, maybe dad is at home working too, and they stay in bed longer until maybe 9 o'clock. They sleep in. Maybe they have breakfast at 9 o'clock or 9:30. The impact that this has had psychologically and on studied habits and things like that, they've just released a report on that is so dramatic that it impacts their psychology, their study habits, their long-term intellectual capacity. So it's really strange how this COVID lockdown has really impacted the society. And this is something that is somewhat observable. You've got to imagine that there are thousands of other things that are less observable, less obvious as a consequence of that. So the only thing that I can say is, thank God this is behind us and we can move forward. Hopefully, although they do expect that there to be other variants, but the pieces are in place now to address and attack something like that should it come up in the future. So that's very good news. It's not really offbeat news. It is relevant, but the Fukushima disaster of 2011, really decimated the Fukushima prefecture, the explosion of the nuclear reactors there. There was a release of the families to go to one of the municipalities in the area of Fukushima reactor number 1. And that started this last week. So Katsurao is the name of the village, and the villagers were invited to come back, cut the grass, revisit their homes, live back where their homestead was. This is after it's been completely vacant of human occupation for the last 11 years. So this is a pretty big deal. It is one of the steps that many of the municipalities need to go through. It's one of the first to occur. So what these people will be experiencing will be fodder for lots of studies and lots of TV dramas. It's a big deal. In this particular municipality, there were 30 households with 82 people in this municipality. It's not quite a village or an enclave, but it is, it's 82 people. It's not a whole lot of people, but it was the support base for one of the for the workers in one of the nuclear reactors. 4 households consisting of 8 people have accepted the invitation to return to their homes. But it's such a big deal that the prime minister actually made a speech and congratulated the people and said that this is part of his larger policy to envelope Fukushima back into the economy, that they would receive funding, that they will receive training. And it's a pretty big deal. There are 6 other municipalities that probably between now and this time next year will also come online. But that leaves 90% of those areas affected that will still be in sticks and weeds and overrun by wild cows and dogs and feral pigs. So it's something to look at. It's interesting that on the same day that this happened, TEPCO was forced, it was by court order, forced to pay about $566,000, $500,000, a little bit more than $500,000, to the people in Tamura City, which was west of reactor number 1. So it's not the same municipality, but these people had gotten together and they sued TEPCO and they sued the government for the emotional distress that they received as a consequence of the nuclear explosion that the government should have foreseen, that they should have prepared for. They should have protected the people in this district from this ever happening. Each of the claimants, and I think there were about 525 claimants, requested 11 million yen each in their claim. That claim was basically turned down. The $500,000 compared to what they sought is very small. And the reason the judge gave for giving such a small amount for emotional damage, for those of you who have been in Japan for any length of time, have been involved in legal controversy or even commercial controversies, knows that Japanese courts are very reluctant to award damages for pain and suffering and in emotional distress. This happens in divorces, in traffic accidents, in involuntary manslaughter, that sort of thing. And you see it again here, where the court has said in their justification for providing such a small amount of damage caused by TEPCO and by the Japanese government for a lot of different things. You know, putting the generator in a sub basement to run all of the pumps, which was flooded, and one of the core reasons why the reactor actually shut down. But the reasoning of the judge is interesting, and sometimes you hear this sort of thing a lot here, is that when they created the facility, the nuclear facility in Fukushima, the analysis and the report of what the potential damage might be in the event of some earthquake or tsunami was lacking in accuracy. So the judge says, since that report was lacking in accuracy, the TEPCO, the builders and the administrators of the facility, really didn't have a firm grasp of it. And the second reason is that it was difficult for the state to foresee the magnitude of this particular tsunami. And so as a consequence, they are relieved of having to pay the amount of money that each of these individuals felt that they deserved for the suffering of emotional distress and damage. It's interesting because it makes you scratch your head, especially if you come from some of the Western countries, particularly the United States, where you know, you spill coffee from McDonald's and you get an $11 million lawsuit claim for that. The psychology and the temperament here is quite different, but it's an interesting thing on the picture of how Japanese society works in a legal context. Also, you might have noticed that Toshiba is a publicly traded company. It is going through, it's always gone through a bit of a turmoil. Toshiba creates nuclear power generators. It's a huge company, maybe 20 billion in capital. It does, you know, semiconductors, quantum computing, that sort of thing. A couple of things that actually the new security legislation deals on. It is going through a bit of a turmoil now for a share, a buyout. So several private equity companies are vying for that. This has happened in the past with, you might have remembered T. Boone Pickens coming into Japan as a kind of a aggressive shareholder in these shareholder suits and trying to purchase Japanese companies. Toshiba is somewhat unique. It is in a little bit of trouble financially. It's always been something of a sick puppy, and several of the investors that are coming in, they're as in many Japanese large companies, there are a lot of foreign investors there, and the same is true with Toshiba. They've received 8 offers from private equities to come in and purchase the shares, take it off of the public shareholdings, purchase everybody's shares, and make it a private company. And of the 8 offers, they're not firm binding offers right now. They're working towards that. But among them are CVC Capital Partners, Blackstone Group, Bain Capital, and prominently among Japanese investors, the Japan Investment Corporation. National security concerns are always raised here, especially when you consider, you know, Bain Capital. People know of Bain Capital. I mean, it's a large investment firm. It is also the hosting organization for Edward Snowden, you might remember, and also one of the places where Bill Haggerty worked when he was a private citizen working in Japan. He actually was in Japan before he became ambassador from the United States. He's a senator now, doing excellently well. I don't mean to cast aspersions on him, but Bain Capital and Blackstone Group are vying for Toshiba. You need to keep an eye on this. I don't think it's going to be pejorative if any of these foreign capital companies don't do well, but there will be a huge fight. There will be a claim that there is discrimination, perhaps, but Toshiba is a barometer of other things that need to happen in this country, which means foreign investment needs to come into this country, foreign capital flows, and also foreign workers. The Prime Minister has said it is one of his policy prerogatives to include more women in the Japanese workforce. So the problem with um, the decline of the Japanese birth rate and the number of people, the highest number of people are dying now because the bubble of people in the older age is kind of climaxing now, and the fewer number of births. So it's at a record number here. This disparity is really causing trouble in the workforce. And so there are very few places that the Japanese administration, the prime minister, can go to enhance that. One of those is getting more foreigners involved, and I think that's one avenue. It's actually a little bit more distasteful than what other options there are, which is, the tremendous push on quantum computing and on digitization, so that we can increase productivity without increasing the number of people. But something needs to give. One of those is the most obvious, and including Japanese women. So the prime minister has stated that is a campaign pledge to bring more women in. If you've got a company of 300 people or more, you must produce the gap disparity in wages between men and women. It is a requirement that you're going to be held to. And you need to implement various initiatives to bring digitization, specialization to the women in the workforce, and also give them more and better opportunities. So in the short term, you can see more of this happening with women in the workforce, women taking board seats, more women in the parliament, hopefully. Japan suffered, they did a survey of how women do in a basic economy. Japan, I think they ranked about 120 of 160 countries that were surveyed in terms of this disparity, which means a kind of discrimination or a mindset that is a holdover from even before the bubble years, actually in the 60s, when Japan went through its tremendous boom, that the man works, he wears a tie, he carries a briefcase, he goes to work, he drinks with his friends, he comes home late, he might work on Saturdays and he sleeps on Sundays, he might go golfing, and then the woman stays home, she raises the kids, she keeps the house clean. That has been so ingrained into the Japanese psyche that it does prevent the women from busting out. But right now, women are getting more. There are more divorces. There are fewer that are having children, and there's this social disassociation with what Japan was typically known for and very proud of, is beginning to take a little bit of momentum. So this is something to be watching very clearly. In the very near term, you're going to be seeing a lot of things going on there. We talked about, just to shift gears a little bit, mini nuclear reactors last week, with the rising prices of fuel, maybe 8-10% of it coming from Russia, the LNG gases that is fueling a lot of the economy here, also going up in prices. The opportunity to not only meet the Kyoto protocols, but also to supply the tremendous energy needs that the country has without importing everything, creates this viability for nuclear power. With the Fukushima reactor situation and how much damage that's caused, there's a lot of sensitivity there, as you can imagine. But for the small modular nuclear reactors, these are really becoming a hot item in terms of investors, in terms of development. There are about 20 different projects globally that are under consideration. These are modular, so they can be built more quickly, more efficiently. They're either cooled by water or by liquid salt or liquid sodium. The problem with these is that they do produce a lot of energy. They can be sustainable. They have maybe a 10 or 12, maybe a 15-year life expectancy before they need to be discarded. But since there are so many of them and they are so small, the waste that is produced as a consequence of them is much higher. All of the waste needs to be, what's the word that they used? They said it needs to be geologically disposed. So that means that they need to dig some sort of a pit and bury the waste. There are a couple of designs and a couple of projects, one in Hokkaido that was just defeated by the municipality there, of digging these deep trenches and having them, super secure and reinforced so that they can store all of this nuclear waste. But that's a process that just is unending with the amount of nuclear waste that is projected to be produced. But the point here is that nuclear is clean in terms of carbon emissions, and it is reliable. So I think what you're going to see is more reliance on renewables, wind, wave, geothermal, and also the importation, once they figure out what the state-of-the-art products are for these small modular reactors. So that's coming up. Two other things I want to talk about. One is interesting in that if you've lived in Japan for any length of time, one of the things that strikes you here is that there's so little crime. You don't see crime. Crime exists here, but it's not something that really strikes your eye. You don't see people fighting in Roppongi. You very rarely see that. You don't see people robbing grocery stores or people. No physical violence. There's almost zero gun violence, and very, very little physical assault. But there is a lot of crime, white collar crime. So I think, I don't know, I've been involved in this kind of area for a long time. I think that on maybe due to human nature and human opportunity, that crime has a certain capacity within a certain society, and some of it is white collar and some of it is black collar. And when there's no white collar crime, there's lots of regular collar crime or blue collar crime. And when there's no blue collar crime, there's lots of white collar crime. And I think that's the story here in Japan. There is lots of stuff that goes on within companies, within corporations. Some of it just gets smoothed away and gets taken care of internally. It never sees the light of day. But there is a lot of crime that goes on here. You saw what happened with, Carlos Ghosn. There is crime. The public prosecutor's office is very active in that. But the one I want to talk about now is fraud at the tax office. So with the COVID relief measures, the Japanese government had dedicated, 5.5 trillion yen in paid out relief for companies who said, look, I had a vibrant business before COVID hit. I don't have that vibrant business anymore. Here's my application. Please give me money so that I can stay afloat, that I can pay my workers, that I can maybe keep my doors open. So the Japanese government has been doing this. That's why the supplemental budget has been produced 3 times now. The first time wasn't enough. The second time wasn't enough. We just produced a huge one this last week. And part of that is to keep companies afloat. So there are a group of actually kids, recent graduates, 24, 25, 26-year-old people. They formed a group. Some of them were in the tax office. Some of them were at Daiwa Securities. Some of them were in the various municipalities. And they formed a kind of a criminal group. It's somewhat unusual. Maybe it happens a lot, but this is one that reached the light of day. And they encouraged other people, students, to apply for this COVID relief. And the scheme was that you apply for the COVID relief and you get the money. Maybe you'll get 1 million yen. You give that yen to us and we invest it in cryptocurrencies, and you're going to earn 200% on the dollar for your investment. And so it was a scam. It really wrapped in more than 250 people who did that. These are usually college students or young people who submitted to that, who were enticed by this group to take this gamble and to get kind of free money. It's a 2-step process, but they were captured. And it's a pretty big deal because it implicates, the tax office and the oversight and the training they had here. But even with that, that's a huge amount of money that is going into COVID relief. They've made an estimate that about 3.1 billion of this is dedicated to fraud. So that's not, when you compare 5 trillion and maybe 3 billion of that is dedicated or consumed by fraud. It's not a huge number, but still it's a big number. That's a lot of fraud that's going on. It's not because of mistakes. It's actually because people in criminal syndicates or just like these kids, they saw an opportunity and took it. So it's somewhat reflective of what's going on in Japanese society, what's going on with ethics, what's going on with the management of money and workers. You might remember that, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, a clerk pressed the wrong button, and instead of sending, several million yen to 500 people living in the municipality, they sent all of that money to one person. And then there was a big fight about, him returning the money. He eventually was arrested, and most of the money was recaptured. But there's a lot of things that go on that just make you a little bit curious about, Japan, about where Japan is standing, how it's going. It's not all roses. You do need to read Bunshun if you want to get a picture of what's going on in Japanese culture and Japanese society. Finally, I want to take a hat off, since I spend a lot of time sailing Japanese waters. I belong to a very popular group of sailors, TSPS. If you're interested in learning how to sail in Japan, it is an island, by the way. Do a Google search for TSPS. It's the Tokyo Power Squadron of Japan. There's an 83-year-old fellow who just sailed from San Francisco to Japan in a small, what was it, maybe a 16-foot boat, solo, with no stops. He just arrived in southern Japan in the port of Kii. It took him 2 months to make this sail. That is an incredible thing. 83 years old, mostly an open cockpit sailboat. To make that journey nonstop is an incredible feat. It is not the first time it was done. The first time this kind of feat was done was in 1963 by this same fellow when he was 23 years old. He sailed from Japan to San Francisco Harbor. He had canned food and rice. It took him 3 months to do that. He sailed into San Francisco, didn't have money, didn't have a passport. He just had a dream. He was welcomed with open arms. He was given a free visa by the mayor of San Francisco at the time. The name of his vessel was the Mermaid 2. And 30 years later, he's doing it again. His boat this time was 19 foot. He left San Francisco in March 27th and arrived just this last week, as I said. His boat this time was called Mermaid 3, actually Suntory Mermaid 3, which tells you maybe who some of his sponsorship there. But that is an incredible feat, and I think it indicates that Japanese appreciation for sailing, for being on the water, is beginning to grow. I sail almost every weekend, and it's somewhat rare to see other sailors out there. You see a lot of fishermen because fishing is very popular here. There are a lot of motorboats, but people who have sailing yachts, it's somewhat less than you would expect if you live anywhere in the United States or in Europe, in the Mediterranean. It's a very popular and vibrant pastime. This same fellow also sailed in 1999 on a boat made of beer kegs. So your heart has to go out to him. What a guy. Anyway, some of that is political in nature. Some of it is just indicative of what's going on in Japanese society and what's going on in culture here. I hope it's relevant to you. I hope you enjoy it. I open the floor for questions and answers. I've gone on a little bit long today. I apologize, but a lot's going on. Maya fell asleep. Okay, I guess I lost Maya. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this up. Here she comes. We're going to wrap this up. The simulcast will end on LinkedIn, and then we'll port over just to, I'm doing your job for you, Maya.
You are, and I'm very grateful to you. Thank you. Sorry for losing me. You cannot hear me? No.
I can hear you.
I hope you can. Okay, good. Yep. So thank you for the preparation. Thank you for the briefing. We're moving to Clubhouse now. And so please, yes, okay, just go over there and we'll have the Q&A session and hopefully a good discussion as well. Okay, see you over there, Timothy.
Thank you, everybody. See you there, Maya.